this to you.
Planetway Corporation CEO, Mr. Noriaki Hirao. So, Mr. Hirao, please. Hello, nice to meet you. I am Hirao of Planetway Corporation, and I'd like to thank you very much for your participation today. So today, I'd like to talk about accelerating the IoT era existence value of global startups. First of all, let me explain my company called Planetway. I know it's not a very familiar name to all of you, so let me briefly outline the company. This company was established on July 1st of this year in San Jose in the United States, so it only has a 5-month history. Our corporate mission is in order to create ecosystems for the Internet of Things era, to provide consultation to various companies so as to create a conglomerate or federation of companies. And one of the things that triggered the establishment of this company, it goes back to 2 years ago when I wrote a 2-year white paper on the IoT online. And at that time, close to 300 companies downloaded that online white paper. And I visited all of these 300 companies and had the chance to talk with members there. And I found that 99% of those 300 companies felt that they didn't know how to engage with IoT going forward, and they inquired with me how they can engage with IoT most effectively. I was working at an IoT hardware vendor at the time, so I was not able to give them a clear-cut answer, and I really regretted this. So that's what prompted me to found my own company and to provide advice and assistance to any company that wants to engage in IoT in Japan. Now, let me talk about my personal views about the 3 pillars which are very critical for IoT. The first pillar is a global network, and second is the IoT platform, and third, open data engine. For the details, I will explain using the next page. So, regarding the global network, the most important element of a global network would be to provide one unified global flat rate. And second, to reduce the costs for development as much as possible. Also, to reduce as much as possible the power dissipation or power consumption of that network. And the fourth point would be a very, very powerful network security. Now, let me talk to the title of network security. Not only the security of the network, but in the age of the IoT, from the device layer all the way to the service layer, platform layer, security, hardening security in all of these layers would be critical. Not only layer by layer security, but security for the entire system must also be explored. One other point, which will be very important and may become a barrier for IoT, is the following. For example, Japanese vendors who want to develop IoT devices and sell them to the world, let's say. But in each country, each government, has these interoperability tests. Well, it's also the acronyms are IoT, but the O in the middle is a big letter. And so you have to pass these compatibility tests for communication. For example, in Japanese carrier networks, if you're using carrier networks and then you want to move that to overseas, and then you have to sign a contract with each of the operators, or you had to provide international roaming. These were the only 2 possible options available. And to have a contract on network environment with each of the operators will entail a lot of time and a lot of costs. For example, I used to work at one time in a Taiwanese company, and let me share with you what happened. When a Taiwanese company wants to connect a network device here in Japan, to connect just one device will require close to 6 months of testing, and the costs involved may be from several millions of yen or to several hundreds of millions, or sorry, hundreds of millions of yen. So a very large cost was involved. On the other hand, let's say hardware that was developed by an excellent Japanese company, if you want to use that or deploy that as an IoT device overseas, the networking portion and the verification of the networks become a very big barrier for entry. And therefore, the network IoT tests, we want to reduce the time and costs of such IoT interoperability tests for these networks as much as possible. And we need a scheme for this, we believe. Now, as of today, we will be announcing the verification or a network, a global SIM, which will greatly reduce the time and cost involved in IoT for global networks. And so I believe that this will overcome one of the three hurdles or difficulties of achieving the IoT world. Now I'd like to talk about the IoT platform and open data engine. And when you hear the word platform, it sounds like it may be a merging of different technologies or communication protocols. There are various communication protocols, ZigBee, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and I think you may associate this with the standardization of these kinds of protocols. But the platform that I have in mind is something consisting of people or companies that want to promote IoT. That's where the focus is. So I believe that such platforms should be developed online, and IoT consortiums and other offline administrations, organizations must also be involved. And also, it's necessary to create a network of alliances with various vendors and different companies in the various fields. And the third point is open data engine. Just linking everything will not achieve IoT. That's not the end. From these connected things, how to add value to the data that's generated from the connectivity amongst things. So, in that sense, we will have to make data open, more and more open. And at a glance, for example, data that seems totally irrelevant or unrelated, and the relationship, the correlation between the two must be immediately identified to generate new value from data. And I think that would be the key to creating an ecosystem of IoT players. So that's another field that we thought required more work going forward. Now, this is a very simplified graph of showing the sort of ecosystem that would be required in order to achieve an IoT society. In the middle is the gateway, so-called IoT gateway, and below the gateway is the various devices which will be connected wirelessly. And the number of devices, well, there are many predictions on this, but for example, several hundreds of million or tens of billions to hundreds of billions by the year 2020. And above the gateway are things that are linked through the internet and the area where cloud big data will be analyzed. And in order to achieve this very simplified drawing, of course, one company cannot do it alone. So going forward, in order to achieve IoT and develop IoT into a social infrastructure, not only the private sector, but the government and universities, as well as private sector companies, not only the big companies, but small and medium-sized companies, startup companies, must form alliances. And in actuality, I think that kind of movement has already begun around the world, especially in the United States or the UK or Europe. We see the formation of various alliances. So I believe that going forward, we should create a confederation of companies that only will be available in Japan in order to compete on an equal footing with the players of the world. And in order to achieve this ecosystem, you need ultimate integration. Integration to the extreme. And I believe that the Japanese players are probably more adept at this than our foreign competitors. And once we create that ecosystem, then what would we do on the ecosystem? Well, there's a real world and the online world. We must link these two worlds together, and the energy, healthcare, and transportation, and weather, various infrastructure with various challenges in the real world should be sensed using sensors and developing the data, and then that data will be fed back to the infrastructure, and for example, statistical data, so some added value data will be provided in order to develop that statistical data into knowledge or insights and to improve transparency, and that data will be used for decision support or judgment support and will then be fed back to the infrastructure as well as to the real world in order to resolve actual problems.
So based on that, I'd like to now touch upon how people around the world can look at how we are doing in the area of the IoT effort in Japan. Once a year, myself, there is the IoT World Forum held in UK on annual basis. I attend the meetings, and people agree on one part that Japan as a nation, maybe Japan is leading in terms of the IoT adaptations. Everything has been connected. That's what people, especially people from Dubai, was telling me in UK. And I couldn't really respond to that statement because that this is a picture that shows the area of the nations where IoT has been advancing itself. The point from that, how people look at Japan in terms of the IoT, and people look at that very intensively about the IoT progress in Japan. People have so much expectations about the progress in IoT. But talk about the Germany Industry 4.0, that's a really important thing. Also, if you compare how we do vis-a-vis other nations and how people around the world look at us, and how the country like Germany and America and where we play vis-a-vis the rest of the world, especially some leading nation like Germany. If you look at the yellow shaded area, please take a note. In terms of connectivity, what needs to be connected, that's important, by which vehicle. And what about ecosystem to be optimized? As I said earlier, integrations, ultimate integration will be necessary at the end of the day. And on top of that, for the IoT, it's not something new to be generated, but there has to be a right infrastructure existing and right apps and the right purposes has to be added on top of the existing platform. That it will be an essential path for the IoT developments. In that case, we are doing okay vis-a-vis other nations like Germany and America. Maybe we have much more than other countries can offer, except one thing underneath in terms of the not driven by the technology per se, but try to convert what we have in terms of current technology to be converted into the IoT area. Germany and the UK, people say that IoT can be defined in terms of what kind of technology will be developed, but rather how the current platform and current infrastructure can be used for the better purposes. So that's the important point for other nations like Germany and UK. And that insight has been a little bit lacking in Japan. So that's the area that maybe we can make some better job in terms of that insight that we don't really have, at least from my perspective. So the challenges we have is that there are several points I'd like to talk to. country like Germany and America, vis-à-vis the advanced nations, we really have the bigger potential compared to other nations because we have the very big economy and we have existing infrastructures and technologies, and each individual person has good literacy, potential literacy as a nation collectively. And if you think about that, there are three pillars to support IoT infrastructure. I think that can become a good social infrastructure, and we don't want to see that as just a piece of buzzword. It has much more than that. So as I travel around the world, and I have come to many cases to observe about the IoT, an area I have very particular interest is the nation called Estonia. So Estonia, we know Estonia, right, as a country, and talk about the My Number. We'll talk about the My Number adaptations. The basic foundation came from this country, the nation Estonia. Well, this nation is seen as the Silicon Valley in the Nordic country. All the transactions are done on the e-residency and e-governments and e-books, and that's been done for the past 15 years already. In Wi-Fi, more than 90% coverage for the Wi-Fi for this country. On top of that, for the entire nation, there are so many cultural heritages in these nations, and also they have the great mindset that using ICT technology, e-governments or e-books has been utilized based on this idea. The Estonia, there's so much beautiful natural resources and beautiful nature, and they still embrace the natural asset while trying to pursue the advance of the ICT. Having said that, I have a very important person to introduce, my dear friend, and I'd like to now introduce a very special person, Raul Ali-Kibi. He is a former the Deputy Director of the Economic and Telecommunication Bureau of Estonia. So I graduated from Japan, so I can speak Japanese a little bit, but because I went to college in Japan.
Speaking English and introducing a little bit about Estonia. I used to work in Estonia at the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Communications, which is in charge of devising the strategies for Estonian information society. But about 3 years ago, I became independent, and now I'm mainly dealing with helping to promote the trade connections between Estonia and Japan through my own companies. But first, how do you know about Estonia? What is the most famous company coming from Estonia? Any ideas? I think most of you have actually used the product, Skype. So Skype is basically founded by one Danish guy and one Swedish guy, but the engineers and the technology came always from Estonia. Estonia itself, I mean, it's a small country up in Northern Europe. Only one country between Estonia and Japan, so maybe not so far, but maybe that one country is big. We have 1.3 million people, which is maybe same as Suginamiku plus Setagayaku. And the land area is about the same as Kyushu. So, Estonia, since becoming independent in the early 1990s, we have joined all possible organizations. So today Estonia is also a member of European Union, OECD, NATO. We are using Euro as well. But why Estonia is interesting when you look at it from the technology viewpoint? So this slide is actually by Tom Goodwin from TechCrunch early this summer, and he said that, yes, something interesting is happening. The world is changing. So we have Uber, which is the biggest taxi company in the world, but it does no vehicles. So we have Facebook, which is the biggest media company, but it doesn't have any content by themselves. We have Alibaba, biggest retail company, but they don't have any inventory. or Airbnb is the biggest company providing accommodations, but they own no real estate. Estonian government CIO, Taavi Kotka, he actually adjusted this slide just last month. And he added also Estonia, saying that Estonia, we only have 1.3 million people, but we have the potential of becoming the largest country in the world. How is that possible? So in Japan, everybody knows about my number. It's probably most of you already got it to home. So even I actually have my Japanese my number. In Estonia, we have had this infrastructure already from 15 years ago. And there are thousands of different services built based on basically Estonian national ID card and on different government and private databases. We have also a mobile version of the ID card. And coming back to the question, how Estonia can actually become the largest country in the world is actually by providing e-residency to everybody in the world. What it means is basically that everybody can apply for Estonian e-residency card, and what it does, it gives you access to Estonian e-government services, and also provides personal identification online, digital identification. And this project was just started about 1 year ago, but we already have more than 7,000 people with not Estonians, but using Estonian e-residency cards. And the goal for 2025 would be 10 million e-residency card users. And if you look at the wider trends, you can see that what you can do with this card is basically you can operate as a company in Estonia. You can have a bank account in Estonia. And having a company in Estonia, you can basically do business all over the world, regardless actually where you are located. So in 2035, there is a prediction that the number of nomad workers, people who are actually moving around and working in different places, will be about 1 billion. So that's how Estonia will become the biggest country. But how it actually works is that in Estonia we have this different databases, government databases, private sector databases, and they're all connected with X-Road. It's kind of data exchange layer, secure. So I think this also, from the viewpoint of IoT, could be actually interesting to see how different databases are connected in a safe and secure way. And access basically is done through this Estonian version of my number card, so Estonian ID card. And today we have more, like 15 years ago when we started this project, we had maybe, people didn't really understand why should we have those cards because there are no services. But today, there are more than 3,000 services built, basically on this infrastructure, using more than hundreds of databases. So just to show some of the services. So one of the most popular services is actually declaring your taxes online. Estonian people love declaring taxes. Every year, when basically the season starts, most of the people declare their taxes within the first 5 days. And 95% of people do it online. Why? It's because if it doesn't take much time, it's about 5 minutes. And if you are entitled to a tax refund, you get your money back in 3 days. So it's a very big incentive how actually people start why people start using it. And maybe let me also demonstrate a little bit about what we also, like another different service that we have. So basically, how the information from different databases in Estonia is gathered together, and how I can actually access it with my Estonian ID card. I'm not using my ID card, but I'm using my mobile ID. So how do we do it? I have to press 2 here. I'm using my mobile card, and I have to put in my phone number. That's my Estonian phone. So who wants, you can call me. And basically, what you can see authentication code, and I got a message coming to my phone, and it's secure because I'm basically using my own PIN codes, which only I know. I put in my PIN code, and I don't really have to touch anything else, but it just goes into the system. It logs in just like that through mobile ID. And in here, basically, I can see what kind of data government has about me. So, for example, okay, I'm married. I have 2 kids. That's my address in Estonia. Education. I have 2 companies, Estasia and Piru. My ID card, passport. I don't have a boating license, but I do have a driver's license. So what is interesting is that basically people are empowered in a sense that you can actually see what kind of data government has about you. And also you're able to see who is watching your data or who is using your data. So in that sense, you have to be responsible for your own data security. So I think it's looking at what we have in Estonia from Japan, especially having my number from next year, I think it will be maybe a good inspiration to understand what might be possible if you have also the same infrastructure in Japan. So what kind of services, what kind of capabilities. Yeah.
So should we just start talk session?
Yeah. Yeah, okay.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I appreciate it. So I believe the Japanese My Number is originally invented by Estonian national ID. Is correct, right? So what makes Estonian country successful in order to achieve this e-government or e-residency, even national ID? How do you overcome the security threat? Because what if, in case of My Number, some people say, what if we lose My Number by itself? Is it safe or is it dangerous? Well, I hear some people always talk about the dangers or situation about My Number losing or stolen their personal information. But by looking at your country, I don't think it's true because My Number is supposed to be one of the good solutions to help people's life easier and better. So let me hear about your opinion.
Yeah, thank you. I think, well, in Japan, My Number has becoming personal data. It's not like this in Estonia. So My Number is basically your digital name. So of course, if you teach your name to somebody, they might actually abuse it and something bad might happen, but it doesn't really mean that you're not, you're hiding your name.
Right.
So My Number in Estonia, or personal ID code, is just like the same. So when my daughter was born in Estonia, basically after birth, she was given a handband with Allikivi, daughter, and her number. So people already get the number at the hospital, and we just gave her own name later. So in that sense, and there's no data on the card itself. It's basically acting just as a key to access different databases through this extra layer. So even if I lose my card and people don't know the PIN codes, it's impossible for them to actually to do anything bad with that. So as long as you do the security correctly, it's actually not really a threat at all.
I see. Thanks. So it's the same with My Number. It's not a security threat. Even if you just have right security, there's nothing that people will lose their personal information.
I think so. It's as long as, basically.
Yeah,
so personally, I don't really understand why it's private information. So
yeah, well, I believe, from my understanding, I believe it's kind of the issue came up from the Japanese people, which has IT or lack of IT literacy. Because some people talk about My Number is dangerous, but they don't really know about what My Number is. If they know about what My Number is or what exactly is in behind, I don't think these kind of questions should come up. So maybe in your country's case, I believe the you government or your company kind of did some of the educational impact or some of the achievement to improve their nation IT literacy. If you can give me some example.
Well, in Estonia, we started to have focus on IT already in 1990s. So, of course, Estonians were not born to be IT literate.
Right.
But we had a program called Tiger Sleep in 1990s. It was a time basically when one computer costed a salary, maybe 3 months' salary of an average person in Estonia. And the government decided to just to give out computers to schools. And also some computers were set up in public libraries and access was provided. So that was maybe the first step. And then also early 2000s, we had some campaigns where just kind of basic IT skills workshops and courses were provided to maybe about 200,000 people. And that's about almost 20% of the population. So I think the coverage was quite big. Wow. But I mean, just very simple things like how to use internet, how to use text editing, and so on. So today we have also pilot projects when basically elementary school kids, they are learning programming from the first grade.
Kids? First grade?
So it's basically, so I think it's not enough to know how to read and write. You actually need to know computers as well and actually understand them a bit better.
Do they do just the same one school or everywhere to run the program?
I think it's a pilot project between 20 schools at the moment.
20 schools? Wow.
But basically what they do is they don't even know how to read or write yet, but they're using symbols to give orders and very simple things.
Wow. That's amazing, huh? Okay, that actually came up with me another question to ask you. It sounds like your government or the pilot system for the education, teaching programming to the first grade, it sounds like your Estonian country is well performed industry, government, private in the collaborations. I mean, in Japan also some people try to do it, but it's kind of difficult. I mean, could you give me some example why you guys succeed about these collaboration between government and private and universities? Because also some people I know that say you guys succeeded because of the size of country, you know, only 1.3 million. But I think for the IoT world, we should just focus on collaboration between those two different kind of, or three different sectors. Would you hear your opinion?
I think it's basically a challenge in every country. So it's not just easy in Estonia or more difficult in Japan. So, and also in Estonia, we have been struggling a lot. So basically, when I was working at Ministry of Economy, that was one of the big issues we always were cracking our heads about. But there are some good examples. So we have Tallinn University of Technology, for example, which is really trying to move closer to private companies in a sense that they have a special business innovation center, which is, has a goal about getting extra budget to the universities, to university from private companies through contracts. So what they do is that if a company has a real life problem, they go to the university and they are matched with the skills available. A professor usually and a team of PhD students. And so the students with maybe young and innovative minds are actually looking at these issues and trying to come up with solutions. Even Japanese companies. So we have one of Mitsubishi Motors has been one of the Japanese companies working already for several years with them.
Wow.
And the second part about the country's size, I think, I mean, in terms of IT, more people is just more lines in a database. So you might need bigger servers, but of course, Estonia is 100 times smaller than Japan. But even India now is doing actually headway in ID numbers and similar projects. And India is bigger, 10 times bigger than Japan, and definitely more diversity. So I think size cannot really be the issue.
Do you think it's also maybe the leadership of the country? Because I heard your prime minister is age of 30 years old, or age of 30.
Prime minister is 1 day older than me.
You're? How old are you?
I'm 36.
Oh, so he's 37?
Yeah, he's 1 day older, so he's also 36.
Oh.
But not let me ask you, I think like today we're also talking about IoT, it's very wide. So what is the main thing in Japan, like what people understand about IoT?
Oh, IoT. Well, I mean, to be honest, extremely speaking, I believe IoT is just a word. And in Japan, there's people have a tendency to try to catch up the trend. And once they hear about this buzzword, they want to try to achieve it, and maybe they want to try to overcome it to get something. But I don't think there's not many people who really understand about IoT. So I think it's just a word. But also, however, like I feel like in your country, you guys are first looking at your problem, then you try to solve it, and then you create this e-residency or e-government. So I think Japanese people should really learn from you guys about how to create something, not just going into the word first, because sometimes buzzword is just a buzzword. So let me ask you back. What's Estonian people how come Estonian people are succeeded to achieve these I don't know, IT e-government or e-residencies without having those buzzwords?
By making many mistakes.
By making mistake?
So it's basically whatever new you're attempting to do, mistakes are inevitable. They will happen.
Right.
And in Estonia, it's also like if you talk about this government services, what we had. One example would be e-prescription. Basically, in Estonia, if you want to get the prescription, you don't really need to see the doctor. If the doctor already knows what kind of medicine you need, you just call the doctor. They will put your information about the prescription into e-health, and you just pick up the medication at the pharmacy with your ID card. So what happened after they launched it? Basically, the program crashed in the next few days.
Right.
And everybody was surprised. Why? Why did it happen? And the reason was, after they looked into it, was that the bandwidth was planned to be the same, but in reality, when elderly people were getting their pensions, the next day they went to the pharmacy and bought medication. So there was a big spike in usage. So you don't really know all those things beforehand. You cannot plan for it. But what is important is that you learn from it and adjust very fast. So in that sense, I would say maybe Estonian government has been working as a startup.
Nice.
Issuing services, maybe even they're not perfect, but adapting and making them better all the time.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah.
That's great.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Arikibi Aro. So, Nori, continue to say a few words on top of that. So let me move on his presentation. So talk about the moving forward with IoT. What are the imperatives? I think that there has to be a collaboration between private and public and the colleges. IoT, even though there are hundreds of private companies, infrastructure of IoT cannot be realized with private sectors alone. So colleges, universities, and the governments and the various other parties have to engage each other and create a partnership. I think that's a key instrument to make IoT possible. And going forward, not just the collaboration of the three parties in Japan, but there has to be global alliances, like a country like Estonia, where different country and also we can also team up to collaborate each other. And just one example that we are driving this year, starting July this year, with government of Estonia, we've been making some collaborations in the area. The ICT Estonia is it's very important area for the ICT, and we do have partnerships, some private firms, and also the infrastructure of the e-governments can be leveraged so that we can create the new businesses, and that's what we are driving since July this year. So as title of my presentation say that for global startup, what are the value can be which can be created by the global startups? I think there are four existing the significance. One is speed and creativity, innovation, and flexibility. So those four premises, when those companies as a startup, I think those are eminent ingredients. But the Japanese-led startups, I think those four elements have to have a global elements, whether it's in different nations and different countries, firms that they can partner each other, and they can create a very unique capability, unprecedented ones that can be driven by the startups. And for the adaptation of the IoT, whether it's a large enterprise or large governments and the colleges, universities, and they have to engage each other. And startup can be a driving force to make them unified each other. So the last page shows my idea of the IoT. I have tried to put everything in one page. There are many elements to it. As I said up front, IoT, there are three pillars to it for IoT. And also, we collaborate with other nations like Estonia, and also internal collaboration with universities and enterprises and the government as well. So this slide, it's a very busy, but we will put the panel at the reception tonight. So I hope that people can join with us at the receptions, and that people can browse around this slide so I can get some feedback from the audience today. So as I was talking to Raul, and I was saying earlier, for the IoT, in extreme term, IoT could be just a piece of word or terminology, but not just a buzzword. But when IoT becomes reality, and there will be always a next step, and there will be a new society, and that can be partly driven by IoT. So people around this room, people who join us today, people, many countries and the governments that can be partnering each other to create a new industry and a new society going forward. So that is it from me. Thank you so much for the attention.